My prayers have been answered. We're getting a Steam Controller 2 of sorts. It's still gonna take some time before we actually get a true Steam Controller 2, but at the very least it seems like Valve is gearing up. So for those that don't know, the Steam Controller is Valve's very first attempt at making a controller, and it's very different from your standard controller. It's very trackpad focused, very trackpad forward, so much so that you don't even have a D-pad or a right analog stick. That said, trackpad gaming really wasn't all that popular, at least until the Steam Deck came out and not only vindicated trackpad gaming, but also ensured that people desired trackpad gaming. Unfortunately, it was an abject failure. It failed alongside the Steam machines. But Valve took everything they learned from the Steam controller and applied that to the Steam Deck, along with, everything they learned about the Steam machines too. So last video I mentioned I had a Steam controller, but I never actually showed it on camera. I've only shown it in old footage. This is the Steam controller that you probably don't have. These are exceedingly rare these days because no one manufactures them. Like legitimately, I'm genuinely surprised there isn't like a company in China that made their own knockoff Steam controllers. So why are we talking about the Steam controller again? Well, as it turns out, there's news about the Steam Controller 2 from your friend Sadly It's Bradley. What we know is that the Steam Controller 2 is codenamed Ibex. What is an Ibex really? Well, it's a type of goat that has these crazy horns. Like, it looks insane. He also mentions a separate controller known as the Roy, which we'll talk about later. He claims that both the Ibex and Roy controllers are being tooled for mass production. They're not being mass produced as we speak, they're being tooled for mass production, which could take a year until they start actually mass producing these. And of course, Sadly It's Bradley claims that this is the later stage of productization, which will eventually culminate in a Steam Controller 2 being sold to the masses. But that doesn't tell us anything about what the controller looks like. As hinted by Bradley himself, he claims that the Steam controller has symmetrical sticks and honestly isn't too far off from the Steam Deck's input styles. So as per Sadly It's Bradley, the Steam Controller 2 will more resemble a Steam Deck than a original Steam controller. There are many mock-ups of the supposed Steam Controller 2, many of which just look like the Steam Deck without a screen. And while, yeah, that's like the easiest way to design a controller, it's also not what's gonna happen. Bradley also claims it'll look more like a standard gamepad. Bradley claims that this mockup is way closer than most of the other mockups you've seen. So I'm not saying this is the Steam controller for certain, but we can just assume it kind of looks like this. So let's go over what the Steam Deck has. The Steam Deck has a D-pad, face buttons, analog sticks, bumpers, triggers, back buttons, and of course the trackpads. The Steam Deck has every function you'd need to play just about every type of game you'd want, including PC games without proper controller support. But the real logistical nightmare is figuring out where to put the trackpads. And it seems like Valve agrees. As per Sadly It's Bradley once again, he also claims that the trackpads themselves will be changed. So yes, we're getting a Steam Controller 2 in a more standard gamepad shape, rather than the Steam Deck's shape. If this is truly the Steam Controller 2 we're getting, then there's a good chance that I'll never use another controller for PC again. All of my controllers I have, I'll never use them again. I'll probably just stick with the Steam Controller 2. Sticks go bad, I'll just replace them with Hall Effect sticks that hopefully someone will make, right? Someone's gonna make Hall Effect sticks for these, right? So that covers the Steam Controller 2. It's a controller that's supposed to be more like a Steam Deck, and that's probably the least surprising outcome. Some of the r/Steam controller faithful may not like the fact that this is taking a more Steam Deck approach, but realistically, it makes sense. And this wasn't the only controller he talked about. He also talked about a controller codenamed Roy to go with a Deckard, both of which are Blade Runner names. So the Deckard was a long-rumored Steam VR headset that's standalone. We've heard rumors about the Valve Deckard since the Steam Deck was announced, before the Steam Deck was even released. The only consistent info we have about the Deckard is that it's supposed to be a standalone headset, something like the Oculus Quest, but it runs Steam VR titles, full PC games. So by the sound of it, the Roy is essentially a VR controller. One for one hand, one for the other hand. The controller set in total is supposed to feature bumpers, triggers, a D-pad, thumbsticks on each side, face buttons on the right side, the ability to squeeze a controller to get an input, and touch capacitive buttons for the face buttons, the ABXY buttons. Yeah, that. One notable omission, of course, are trackpads. There are no trackpads on the Roy, at least according to this post by Sadly It's Bradley, featuring all input styles. Could Valve include trackpads later down the line? Sure, they could. But as it stands right now, it's a safe bet to assume that the Roy doesn't come with trackpads. But if you look at all of the other controls that it comes with, it seems kind of like a VR controller with all the buttons you need to play regular video games as well. I mean, you have your thumbstick, your D-pad, your face buttons, your other thumbstick, you've got bumpers and triggers. I mean, that's basically an Xbox controller that's also a VR controller as well. Which says a lot more about what the Deckard could be, because the Deckard could be more than just a standalone VR headset. It could be Valve's attempt at breaking into spatial computing. Like, imagine a Steam Deck, but in a VR form. Imagine being able to play all of your Steam Deck games in your VR headset, you know, spatially. Like, traditionally speaking, VR controllers have never included a full complement of controls, you know, enough controls to play games on like an Xbox or something. VR controllers have never had that, and now this Roy controller does. Spatial computing's always been one of those things that seems super interesting, but I also don't want to buy a Apple Vision Pro for like $3,000. I kind of also don't want to buy a Meta Quest 3 either. But a Valve spatial computer, I might just do it. But it also depends on what sort of hardware is running in the Valve Deckard, because for a long time it was assumed that the Valve Deckard would run the same APU as a Steam Deck. You know, the AMD APU. And it was a pretty good bet. I mean, Steam Deck, Deckard, Deckard, get it? But in recent times, we've seen Valve do work with ARM. We've seen Fex being paired up with Proton on ARM. All of this work was explicitly for VR work. Like, all the Proton on ARM stuff relates to VR, but all this is easily transferable to standard PC games. I mean, we're starting to see ARM run modern PC titles fairly effectively. Stuff like Fex or Winlator. It's crazy that phones can run x86 applications altogether, much less at a playable 30 FPS. And these are fairly new titles too. And those are ARM CPUs made for phones. If you have one that's made for like a laptop, things could get even crazier. Like, look at Apple. Apple Silicon has been killing it, not just in performance efficiency, but also just straight performance, especially their M4 devices. Like, it was mind-boggling to see that ARM was capable of such performance. And we're starting to see Snapdragon laptops on Windows not suck. In fact, they're actually quite good for every single task except gaming. And if Valve can get past that gaming hurdle, then Valve making ARM PC gaming viable would be insanity, and it would make the Deckard a clear winner. Okay, I've rambled for far too long, but all I'm saying is that the Steam Controller 2 is going to be promising. But the Valve Deckard plus Roy could change everything. But, I mean, to be honest, what am I going to do? I'm probably going to get a Valve Deckard and pair my Steam Controller 2 with that while using the Roy for, you know, VR titles. Maybe, just maybe I'll play Half-Life Alyx finally. If you like this video, please press the like button and check out our other videos. And if you like those other videos as well, be sure to press the subscribe button and share the good gospel of high-tech lowlife with your friends. Furthermore, we have a community Discord for enlightened individuals such as you. And if you wish to further support high-tech lowlife, be sure to check out our Patreon page. Links in the description.